As a chef, I've always figured the shortest path to someone's heart runs right through their stomach. But what happens when that stomach takes a detour down a road paved with grease and betrayal? That's where my story starts. And trust me, it's got more layers than a lasagna though, not the soggy kind they sling at Tony's Bistro. I'm a chef, the sort who treats every dish like a masterpiece. My kitchen's my fortress, my spatula's my weapon of choice. So when my wife started hauling home takeout from Tony's at Dive, I wouldn't trust to season my compost I didn't just smell bad marinara. I caught a whiff of something rotten. Those greasy bags started showing up like uninvited guests, night after night, reeking of cheap oregano and excuses. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe she was just tired. Maybe she'd lost her taste buds. But the chef in me? He doesn't ignore a bad recipe. He digs in. So I did what I do best. I dissected the evidence. I recreated their pathetic lasagna in my own kitchen, breaking it down like a crime scene. The pasta was overcooked mush, the oregano was bargain bin dust, and the whole thing lacked soul like someone had given up halfway through. It wasn't just bad food, it was a confession in every bite. Something was off. And it wasn't just Tony's cut-rate cooking. My gut told me to keep digging. And my guts never steered me wrong, except maybe that one time with a sketchy oyster. But that's another story. I couldn't let it sit. I had to see for myself. So I staked out Tony's Bistro like some culinary Columbo, minus the trench coat but with the same knack for sniffing out trouble. I parked myself across the street, watching the neon sign flicker like a dying dream. And then, there she was. My wife, cozying up at a corner table, feeding some chump a forkful of Tony's overcooked ravioli. It was a gut punch with extra cheese watching her share that slop with him, like it was some kind of twisted communion. I didn't storm in. I didn't flip tables. I just sat there, letting the irony sink in. I'd been cooking her my heart, and she'd traded it for a plate of reheated lies. Back home, I didn't yell. I didn't break disgusting as it was. Instead, I plated up my response. A farewell dish, sharp with bitter herbs and a twist of spite. I set it in front of her, flashed a smile that could have cut glass, and let the silence do the talking. Bon appétit, I said. And that was that. It wasn't a meal, it was a statement. I knew, and I was done. Relationships, like recipes, need fresh ingredients, trust, effort, a little heat. You can't build anything worth a damn on stale scraps and second-hand promises. As I walked away from that table, her voice hit my back my name, soft and shaky. I didn't turn around. I had a new recipe brewing, one that didn't have her in it. My spatula was still in hand, and I was ready to cook up something better. That's where it stands. I'm no victim, just a man who knows his worth, walking tall with a little swagger and a lot of sarcasm. Life's too short for bad food or bad company, and I've got plenty of both to leave behind. What comes next? That's a dish still in the works, simmering on the back burner, waiting for the right moment to serve. The morning after the park meeting hit me like a hangover from a cheap bottle of wine, unpleasant but unavoidable. My head was buzzing, not from booze this time, but from Clara's bombshell, embezzlement. It was a tough bite to chew, like overcooked liver. I'd always known my wife had a palate for luxury, but skimming client accounts? That was a new low, even for her. Still, I wasn't about to let it spoil my broth. The food truck was my clean slate, and I'd be damned if she dragged me back into the fryer. I met Marco at the garage again, ready to whip that rust heap into shape. In daylight, the truck looked like a forgotten leftover gone bad, but I saw a diamond in the rougher, at least a decent sauté pan under the grime. We spent the morning sanding down the exterior, scraping off the old logo like burnt cheese clinging to a skillet. Marco was all sunshine, joking about our future food empire, but my mind kept simmering over that text. You're digging into something dangerous. Back off, or you'll get burned. It was vague, like a critic's snarky review without specifics unsettling, but not enough to make me toss the dish. By noon, the truck was starting to look less like scrap and more like potential, and my hands were coated in grit. Wiping them on a rag felt good, honest like kneading dough by hand instead of cheating with a mixer. Messy, sure, but you feel every second of it. As I stepped back to eye our work, my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. This time, It was curt. Last warning. My pulse kicked up a notch. Warnings are like under-seasoned soup dull, unless they've got some bite. I wasn't sure what this one was packing, but I wasn't about to fold. That afternoon, I decided to stir the pot. Clara had given me a nibble of the truth, but I wanted the whole damn recipe. I drove to my wife's firm, parking across the street like a culinary sleuth on a stakeout. The building was all glass and steel, a shrine to corporate gluttony. Think overpriced lattes and underpaid grunts. I watched the suits shuffle in and out, their faces as flavorless as boiled chicken. Then I spotted Hermie wife, strutting out with Tony glued to her side, his hand on her lower back like he owned the place. It stung, but I swallowed it like a bitter appetizer. This wasn't about heartache anymore. It was about serving justice. I tailed them through traffic, weaving like a line cook dodging orders in the dinner rush. They pulled into a ritzy joint downtown, the kind that charges you for vibes and serves portions smaller than a tasting spoon. I parked a block away and slipped inside, keeping my head down. The hostess gave me a once-over like I was there to check the drains, but I flashed a grin and mumbled about meeting a buddy. She let me pass, and I snagged a spot at the bar with a clear shot of their table. They were huddled up, heads close, hands waving like they were plotting a Michelin-starred heist. I ordered a whiskey, neat, and sipped it slow, watching the show. It was like a bad cooking program, lots of chatter, no meat. Then Tony slid a folder across the table, and my wife's eyes sparkled like she'd just cracked the code to a flawless soufflé. She flipped through it, nodding, a smirk curling her lips, the look of someone who thinks they've dodged the bill. I'd seen it before, usually right before I caught a thief red-handed in my kitchen. I slipped out before they clocked me, the whiskey stoking my fire. Back in the truck, I gripped the wheel until my knuckles whitened. The puzzle was coming together, but I needed Moria solid garnish to take to the cops, or maybe Clara, if she was legit about blowing the lid off. Driving home, my brain churned like a blender on high. The threats, the embezzlement, the affair, it was a messy stew of lies and greed, but I wasn't letting it ruin my taste for payback. That night, I camped out in my kitchen, my sanctuary. The counters gleamed, the knives sharp enough to split hairs. I poured a glass of red wine, letting it breathe while I mulled my next move. The cops were an option, but they'd demand hard proof, and Clara's word might not cut it. Confronting my wife was tempting, but it had tipped my hand too early. No, I had to play it slow, let the flavors meld until the dish was just right. Then my phone buzzed again. Clara, meet me at the diner. Urgent. I frowned, a chill creeping up my spine. Urgent, in my world, meant a grease fire or a critic at the Pass Never Good. I grabbed my keys and headed out, the night air crisp against my skin. The diner was a dive, serving coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Clara was already there, back to the wall, eyes darting like a rookie on their first shift. She looked up as I slid into the booth, her face pale. No small talk, she shoved a folder across the table, hands shaky. I flipped it open. Bank statements, emails, transaction logs, a jackpot of dirty laundry. My wife's name was splattered across it, Tony's too, plus a few strangers. It was a recipe for ruin, each line more incriminating than the last. I glanced at Clara, eyebrows up. She nodded, lips tight. But before I could digest it, the diner door swung open. Two guys strolled in casual clothes, predator eyes. One locked onto me, and my gut went cold. I'd seen that stare before, from a critic who'd just found a flaw in my dish. Trouble was brewing, and it was marching right toward us. The chef and Clara slipped deeper into the city's underbelly, the night wrapping around them like a damp apron after a long shift. The air was thick with exhaust and the faint tang of spilled beer from the bar they'd just escaped. The folder tucked inside the chef's jacket felt like a lead weight, pressing against his ribs with every step. Whatever was in those paper she's wife's betrayal, spelled out in ink and numberset, could wait. Right now, survival was the only dish on the menu. The alley they'd spilled into was a narrow vein of shadows, lined with overflowing dumpsters and the occasional flicker of a dying streetlight. Clara's breath came in short, sharp bursts beside him, her sneakers splashing through puddles he couldn't avoid. He kept his pace steady, one hand gripping hers, the other brushing the rough brick wall to guide them. Behind them, the bar's back door clanged faintly, maybe the wind, maybe those goons picking up their scent again. He wasn't taking chances. Ahead, the alley opened into a wider street, alive with the hum of late-night traffic and the glow of neon signs promising cheap eats and cheaper drinks. The chef's mind raced, flipping through options like a menu he hadn't prepped for. They needed a hideout, somewhere to catch their breath and figure out the next play. Marco's place was still the best beat a rundown, garage-turned apartment on the edge of town, no questions asked. But getting there meant crossing the city, and those tattooed shadows weren't likely to let them stroll out uninvited. He pulled Clara closer to the mouth of the alley, peering out. The street was a river of headlights and hurried footsteps, delivery guys on bikes, bar hoppers laughing too loud, a street vendor packing up his cart. Cover, but not enough. The chef's eyes narrowed as he scanned the crowd. There ain't no sign of the scar-faced thug or his inked-up partner, yet. His gut told him they were close, circling like vultures over a fresh kill. "We need to move," he muttered, more to himself than to Clara. She nodded, her jaw tight, and he felt a flicker of respect. She was green, sure, but she wasn't cracking, not yet. He spotted a battered delivery van idling across the street, its driver arguing with a guy in a greasy apron over a stack of crates. The van's back doors hung open, a dark maw of possibility. Risky, but better than waiting to get pinned. The chef squeezed Clara's hand, a silent signal, and they darted out of the alley, weaving through the crowd. Horns blared as they cut across traffic, but he didn't look back. The van was their shot. They reached it, just as the driver slammed his clipboard down on the crates, still yelling. The chef didn't hesitate. He hoisted Clara into the back, then scrambled in after her, pulling the doors shut with a soft thud. Inside, it was a chaos of cardboard boxes and the sharp scent of onions and garlic. He pressed himself against the wall, motioning for Clara to do the same. Her eyes were wide, but she stayed quiet, tucking herself behind a stack of produce. The van rocked as the driver climbed in, still grumbling. The engine sputtered to life, and they lurched forward. The chef held his breath, listening for shouts, for fists banging on the doors. Nothing, just the rumble of the road and the muffled rant of the driver up front. They'd bought some time, but not much. He shifted, the folder crinkling inside his jacket. Clara watched him, her face pale in the dim light filtering through a crack in the doors. "Where are we going?" she whispered, barely audible over the engine. "Somewhere safe," he said, keeping his voice low. "A friend's place. We'll figure this out there." She nodded, but her eyes flicked to the folder. She didn't ask, and he didn't offer. Not yet. Whatever his wife had, cooked up debts, deals, or something darker, he'd plated up when they weren't running for their lives. The van jostled them through the city, each turn a gamble. The chef's mind churned, mapping out Marco's spot. A squat concrete box near the rail yards, hidden behind a tangle of overgrown lots. If they could get there, they'd have a breather. Marco owed him years back. The chef had pulled him out of a jam involving a botched catering gig and a very angry bride. Time to cash in that favor. After what felt like hours but was probably minutes, the van slowed, then stopped. The driver's door creaked open and footsteps crunched on gravel. The chef tensed, ready to bolt if the back doors swung wide, but the driver just cursed under his breath and walked off, leaving the engine idling. A drop-off, maybe. The chef didn't wait to find out. He eased the doors open a crack, peering out. They were in an industrial stretch warehouses, chain-link fences, the distant clatter of a train. No sign of the driver, no sign of pursuit. He climbed out, helping Clara down, her legs shaky but steadying fast. The van's taillights glowed red as the driver disappeared into a loading bay, oblivious to his stowaways. The chef oriented himself. Marco's place was a mile or two west, past the tracks. They could make it on foot if they stayed off the main roads. He adjusted the folder under his jacket, the weight of it grounding him. This wasn't just about escaping anymore, it was about answers, about clawing back control. "Come on," he said, leading Clara into the shadows of the warehouses. The night stretched ahead, cold and unforgiving, but he didn't flinch. He'd handled worse shifts than this, pulled miracles out of chaos with nothing but a knife and a stove. This was just another rush, another fire to tame. But as they moved, the folder seemed to burn against his chest, a promise of trouble he couldn't outrun. The goons might have lost them for now, but they'd be back. And whatever his wife had stirred into this mess, it was simmering, ready to boil over. The chef tightened his grip on Clara's hand and kept going, one step at a time, just like always. The real heat was coming, he could feel it, and he'd be damned if he let it burn him out. The night swallowed us whole as we cut through the industrial maze, the folder tucked inside my jacket like a ticking time bomb. The air was thick with the scent of diesel and damp concrete, the kind of smell that clings to your clothes long after you've left. Clara stayed close, her breath puffing in short bursts, but she didn't complain. Good. I wasn't in the mood for a side of whining with my escape. Marco's place was a squat, concrete box tucked behind a tangle of overgrown lots and rusted rail cars. It wasn't much, but it was off the grid, just the kind of spot you'd stash a sous chef who'd burned one too many steaks. I'd been there once, years back, when Marco needed a place to crash after a catering gig went sideways. He owed me for that, and tonight I was cashing in. We slipped through a gap in a chain-link fence, the metal snagging at my sleeve like a needy line cook. The rail yard loomed ahead, a graveyard of forgotten freight cars and weeds pushing through cracked pavement. I kept us low, moving from shadow to shadow, my eyes scanning for any sign of movement. The goons might have lost us for now, but I wasn't betting on it. They had the look of guys who'd chase a bad review to the ends of the earth. Clara stumbled on a loose rail tie, and I caught her elbow, steadying her. She shot me a grateful glance, but I saw the fear flickering in her eyes. She was tough, but this wasn't her kitchen. Almost there, I muttered, more to keep her moving than anything. Truth was, I didn't know how close we were to safe or if safe even existed anymore. We reached the edge of the yard, Marco's place just visible through a stand of scraggly trees. The windows were dark, but that didn't mean much. Marco wasn't exactly the type to leave a light on. I motioned for Clara to stay put and crept closer, my boots crunching softly on gravel. The door was a slab of steel, no handle, just a deadbolt. I rapped twice, paused, then 3 times her old code from the kitchen days. Nothing. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. My gut tightened. Marco was either passed out drunk or not home, and neither option was ideal. I glanced back at Clara, her silhouette barely visible in the gloom. We couldn't stay out here, exposed like a raw steak on a counter. Then I remembered. Marco kept a spare key under a loose brick by the back window. I circled around, feeling along the foundation, until my fingers found the spot. The brick wiggled free, and there it was, a grimy key, glinting like a lifeline. I grabbed it and unlocked the door, waving Clara over. Inside, the place smelled like stale beer and motor oil, with a faint undertone of burnt garlic. Marco's idea of home cooking, no doubt. I flicked on a lamp, casting a weak glow over the cluttered space. A sagging couch, a workbench covered in tools, and a mini-fridge humming in the corner. Not exactly a 5-star suite, but it'd do. Clara sank onto the couch, her hands trembling as she brushed hair from her face. I locked the door and wedged a chair under the knob for good measure. Then I pulled the folder from my jacket and tossed it on the workbench. It landed with a thud, the sound heavy in the quiet room. She eyed it like it might bite. "What's in there?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Trouble," I said, pouring us both a glass of water from the sink. It tasted like rust, but it was wet. "Your boss-me wife cooked up something nasty. Embezzlement, you said. But those goons? That's not just about money. That's personal." Clara took a sip, her knuckles white around the glass. I didn't know how deep it went. I just saw the numbers didn't add up, and when I started asking questions, she threatened me. Said I'd regret it if I didn't keep quiet. I leaned against the bench, crossing my arms. "So you bailed. Smart move. But why come to me? Why not the cops?" Her gaze dropped to the floor. I tried. They didn't take me seriously, said I needed more proof. And then those guys showed up at my apartment, trashed the place. "I figured you'd want to know, since it's your wife and all." I snorted. "Ex-wife, soon enough. But yeah, I want to know. I want to bury her in this mess she's made." I flipped open the folder, spreading the papers across the bench. Bank statements, transaction logs, emails. Clara wasn't kidding. It was a feast of fraud, each document more damning than the last. My wife's name was all over it, along with Tony's and a few others I didn't recognize. They'd been siphoning cash from client accounts, funneling it through shell companies, the works. It was sloppy, thumacha hour, like someone trying to make a roux with cold butter. But one name kept popping up, Vincenzo Vinny Russo. I'd heard of him rumors mostly, the kind that float around the restaurant scene like bad smells. Vinny was connected, the kind of guy who could make problems disappear, or make you disappear if you became the problem. If my wife was tangled up with him, those goons suddenly made a lot more sense. I tapped the name, showing Clara. "You know anything about this guy?" She paled. "Vinny? He's not someone you mess with. I overheard her talking to Tony about him once. Something about keeping Vinny happy. I didn't stick around to hear more." "Great," I muttered. "So we've got a crooked wife, a greasy lover, and a mobster in the mix. This just keeps getting better." I paced the room, my mind racing. Taking this to the cops was still an option, but with Vinny involved, it might not be enough. Guys like him had tentacles everywhere, including the precinct. No, I needed to be smarter. Play this like a slow-cooked stew, low and slow, until the flavors were just right. Then it hit me, the food truck. Marco and I were fixing it up to launch next month, but maybe it could be more than just a business. Maybe it could be a front, a way to gather intel, get close to the players without raising flags. Vinny owned a string of restaurants and clubs places that needed catering, supplies, the works. If I could get the truck in the door, I might find a way to turn the heat up on them from the inside. It was a long shot, but I'd pulled off crazier stunts in the kitchen, like the time I turned a botched dessert order into a flaming masterpiece that had the critics drooling. This was just another challenge, another dish to perfect. I stopped pacing and looked at Clara. "You still got access to the firm's systems?" She blinked. Yeah, I think so. They haven't locked me out yet." "Good. I need you to dig deeper, find out how Vinny's connected, what he's got on her. Meanwhile, I'll work on getting the truck ready. We're going to cater our way into this mess and serve it back to them cold." Her eyes widened. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," I said, a grin tugging at my lips. "They want to play dirty? Fine. But they're about to learn that you don't mess with a chef in his own kitchen." Just then, the door rattled, the chair wedged under the knob shuddering. Clara gasped, and I spun, my hand instinctively reaching for the nearest Wapona wrench on the bench. The rattling stopped, replaced by a familiar voice. "Yo, chef, you in there? It's Marco." I exhaled, lowering the wrench. "Yeah, it's me. Hold on." I moved the chair and unlocked the door. Marco stumbled in, reeking of cheap whiskey and cigarette smoke. His eyes were bleary, but they sharpened when he saw Clara. "Who's the dame?" "Long story," I said, locking the door again. "We need a place to crash for a bit. You good with that?" He shrugged, flopping onto the couch. "Mi casa, su casa, boss. But if you're bringing trouble, I want in on the action." I smirked. "Oh, there's plenty of action to go around. Grab a seat, we've got work to do." As Marco settled in, I spread the papers out again, the plan starting to simmer in my mind. It was risky, sure, but I'd always said the best dishes come from the edge of disaster. And this one? It was going to be a masterpiece. But as I glanced out the window, a shadow flickered across the rail yard. A figure, maybe, or just a trick of the light. My gut tightened. The goons were still out there, and Vinny's reach was long. We'd have to move fast, stay sharp, and trust no one. The real heat was coming, and I was ready to turn it up to 11. The night of the party arrived like a perfectly timed soufflé. Everything had to be just right, or it'd all collapse. The chef's food truck, now a rolling fortress of revenge, was parked behind Vinny's club, a sleek, black-painted beast of a venue that screamed illicit dealings louder than a fire alarm in a silent kitchen. The chef, Clara, and Marco had spent the week prepping, turning the truck into a mobile feast machine, ready to serve sliders, tacos, and a hefty side of justice. Inside, the party buzzed with suits and sequins, laughter that cost more than the chef's rent, and enough perfume to choke a health inspector. Clara, disguised in a server's uniform, her hair tucked under a wig, eyes sharp behind thick glasses, moved through the crowd like a shadow. She'd insisted on planting the evidence herself, calling it her mess to clean up. The chef didn't argue. Her fire was the kind that'd make a great line cook, always pushing through the heat. The chef stayed at the grill, flipping patties and keeping one eye on the crowd. Then he saw her, his wife, draped in a dress that probably cost a month's profits, hanging off Tony's arm like a garnish on a plated dish. They were schmoozing with Vinny, a stocky man with a bulldog face who looked like he'd been punched one too many times. The chef's blood simmered, but he kept his cool, focusing on the sizzle of the meat. Clara caught his eye from across the room, giving a slight nod. The documents proof of the wife's embezzlement and Tony's double-dealing were in place, tucked into a stack of napkins on Vinny's private table. Now, it was a waiting game. But fate, like a bad sauce, can curdle fast. The wife's gaze swept the room and landed on the chef. Her eyes narrowed, recognition dawning like a storm cloud. She excused herself from Tony and Vinny, striding over with that walk she used when she was about to dress down a waiter. "What the hell are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice low but sharp enough to cut through the chatter. The chef wiped his hands on his apron, meeting her glare with a smirk. "Just doing what I do, best serving up the truth, one dish at a time." She scoffed, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. "You're pathetic. You think crashing this party changes anything? You're out of your league, darling." He leaned in, close enough to smell her overpriced perfume. "Maybe. But I've got a few tricks up my sleeve, sweetheart. You always did underestimate me." Before she could retort, a shout erupted from Vinny's table. He'd found the documents, his face turning a shade of red that'd make a lobster jealous. "What the hell is this?" he bellowed, slamming the papers down. Tony rushed over, his face paling. "Vinny, what's wrong?" Vinny shoved the documents at him. "This? You and her cooking the books behind my back? You think I'm stupid?" The wife's eyes widened, darting between Vinny and Tony. "What? No, that's not." Vinny wasn't buying it. He snapped his fingers, and two goons materialized from the shadows, grabbing Tony by the arms. "You're done, both of you. I want my money back, and I want it now." In the chaos, another goon grabbed the chef, mistaking him for part of the scheme. "Hey, I'm just the caterer," he protested, but the grip tightened. That's when Clara stepped in, her voice cutting through the noise like a knife through butter. "Wait, look at this." She held up her phone, showing Vinny a series of emails and bank transfers irrefutable proof that implicated the wife and Tony, while clearing the chef entirely. Vinny snatched the phone, scrolling with a scowl. After a moment, he grunted, "Let him go. He's clean." The goon released the chef, who straightened his apron, and shot Clara a grateful nod. Vinny turned back to the wife and Tony, his anger now a controlled burn. "You two, though you're coming with me, we've got some things to discuss." As the goons dragged them away, the wife shot the chef a look of pure venom. "This isn't over," she spat. He shrugged, plating a slider with extra sauce. "Oh, it is for me. Enjoy your just desserts, darling." Marco, who'd been waiting in the wings, accidentally knocked over a tray of flaming cocktails, sending a burst of fire and confusion through the room. Guests screamed, and in the pandemonium, the chef and Clara slipped out the back, leaping into the food truck where Marco was already revving the engine. The truck tore out of there, tires squealing like a banshee. Behind them, the club dissolved into a blur of lights and shouting, but they were free. Clara La Fida sound of pure relief, and the chef couldn't help but join in. Later, they parked by the river, the city's skyline glittering in the distance. Clara had sent the evidence to the cops from a burner phone, ensuring Vinny's operation and the wife and Tony would come crashing down. The chef handed Clara and Marco each a beer from the cooler, raising his own in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said, clinking bottles. "And to never underestimating a chef," Clara added with a grin. Marco chuckled, taking a swig. "Damn straight. Now, let's get this truck rolling for real. I've got a feeling we're going to be busy." The chef looked out at the water, the weight of betrayal finally lifting. The food truck was more than a business, it was a fresh start, a chance to create something honest and good. With friends like these, he knew they'd make it sizzle. As the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, he felt a peace he hadn't known in years. The recipe was complete betrayal, turned to triumph, danger to freedom, and it was delicious.